8 SEC football programs took the field yesterday for their spring games, and we are here to break it all down as we got a little bit of a taste, not the full thing, but a taste of SEC football as we continue the countdown until toe meets rubber on the 2024 college football season. I am Chris Phillips. He is Blayne Gilmer, and again, we are here breaking down all of the action, all 8 SEC spring games, guys, wherever you're tuned in, Facebook, YouTube, X, Twitter. We appreciate you guys being here. Be sure you hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube. Make sure you follow us via podcast as well, iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. And, of course, we're all across social media and over at our website, secunfiltered.com as well. Again, guys, like I mentioned, I'm Chris Phillips. He is Blayne Gilmer. Blayne, appreciate you taking the time, my friend. Really excited to dive into each and every single one of these spring games. How was your weekend, my friend? How you feeling now that we got some SEC football to talk about that actually took place on the field?
Man, it's just exciting to be able to sit down and as a junkie like me, just to be able to take some notes again, as weird as it sounds for people, just to sit down and break things apart and say, okay, what's going on here? What do we need to look forward to this fall? What are some problem areas? All of this stuff that's going on. It does the soul good as the former coach in me, just to be able to sit down and diagnose some football. So I'm always thankful for it, man.
And by the way, those of you tuned in live, be sure to leave us your super chats. We will get to your questions, your comments all throughout the show. If you've got anything you want us to discuss specifically or any questions or comments, like I mentioned on the games that took place yesterday, send us a super chat on YouTube. We will be sure to get to that throughout the show. Without further ado, Blayne, let's go ahead and dive into it. We will start in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Probably the most notable of spring games, just when you think about Kalen DeBoer, his very first one. Of course, as you can imagine, it was packed out at Bryant-Denny Stadium for A-Day. You know, admittedly, Blayne, my eyes went to the quarterbacks most of these spring games. Jalen Milroe, I want to get your take on him first. 3 for 9 in the ball game. You know, I thought you saw, obviously, the arm strength. We all know he's so good with the deep ball. I thought he showed the touch a little bit here and there. But there's no doubt, you know, there had been talks, maybe there's a quarterback competition, maybe there isn't, but it's safe to say this is Jalen Milroe's football team. But we'll start with him, and again, the rest of what you saw from Alabama in that A-Day game. Again, we'll go ahead and acknowledge it's really difficult, maybe a fool's errand, to draw conclusions from a spring game, but we'll do the very best we can. What did you see that you liked, you disliked, and maybe in between, Blayne, from Kalen DeBoer's first A-Day game?
I guess maybe if you're going kind of good, bad, and ugly, I would say the good is I think you see playmakers still all around the field. You know, whether it's Kendrick Law, whether it's Bernard that has come over the transfer, went up and made some nice plays. I thought on some balls that were kind of 50-50 balls at different times. So that's nice on the outside. Of course, I think we know what Prentice can do. He didn't get utilized a bunch in this scrimmage, but I think we know what he can do. And then the running backs, that was the most encouraging thing to me. I mean, I'm telling you, Jam Miller is lightning in a bottle. And when you talk about Justice Haynes, I think Justice Haynes has the opportunity to be maybe the most complete back that there is out there. When this guy, he knows he has a pro mindset from what his dad did, longtime Pittsburgh Steeler. You know, he's a guy that is been kind of groomed for this moment, and now we saw him start to get his opportunities in the Rose Bowl, and now I think he's going to get even more going into the season. He had a run early on in the game at the goal line where lateral quickness made somebody miss and then finished off a run, physicality to get into the end zone. I just think Justice Haynes is a complete package. But let's talk about Richard Young a little bit. My goodness, I put down beside Richard Young and a couple other guys the acronym GAS, G-A-S, and I'm going to start using this season because that is grown ass strength is what that is, and Richard Young has it. I mean, he was running through people, yes, Alabama's tackling was poor throughout most of the day. I think Kane Womack has some stuff to get through, but Richard Young was running the football. Now, the bad, I don't think the quarterbacks played particularly well. I think you see Jalen Milroe, but I think the terminology, I think the scheme, they're still getting adjusted to it. I think Ty Simpson actually played better than Jalen Milroe, looked really nice. But in terms of that, we're not going to know until the bullets fly and you got that adrenaline going with Jalen Milroe and he's able to, utilize his entire package, which is part of that run game. The ugly, like I said, I just thought the tackling and I thought the execution on the defense with some very, very, very young guys in that secondary was not very good at all. And that's going to be something that I think Alabama fans are going to really, really be wanting to see improve when the first game of the season rolls around.
And Blayne, we're going to dive into this more as we go throughout this conversation, but I guess the differences in philosophy when it comes to these spring games, you got folks like Bama and Georgia, and you turn those on, and I mean, it's pads popping, it's physicality, like you mentioned, some others, they're not even tackling. So I guess my question for you, Blayne, is just, do you put a lot of stock in what you saw in Bama's defense yesterday? Because, again, spring game overreactions, they happen, good, bad, or indifferent, if you will. Some folks concerned about what they saw on the defense. I mean, again, is that something where does it raise a red flag for you, or do you just kind of write it off as no big deal?
There's just a couple of things. I know that you're going to get some catches, some big time plays in offense, stuff like that. They're gonna have you schemed up and things of that nature. That's fine. Where Alabama needs to be concerned is the missed tackles were plentiful, and tackling is something that you have to just continue to tackle to be able to get better at it. You got to keep practicing it, and they were not good at it on Saturday. Okay. And also allowing themselves to get outflanked the perimeter in terms of the jet sweep runs, the outside runs, things of that nature. You saw a Alabama team, a outside linebacker squeeze down, and nobody was there to replace on maybe the first play of the game, where Kendrick Law went in and cracked the safety, which I believe was Malachi Moore, who's moved back from the star position to the safety position, and there was no corner there to fill. I think Nick Saban probably wanted to throw himself out of the box on that first play and see that going on, because that's just not something you saw at Alabama defenses. And it's just going to be an adjustment period for Kane Womack on that end. But like I said, playmakers all over the field on offense. Still think you got physicality in the run game. I think this defense is a few steps behind the offense at this point.
Blayne, I think you and I feel pretty confident going back to the quarterback position that Jalen Milroe is the leader of this football team, the heart and soul of this team, and he is QB1. But do you feel like maybe the performance yesterday, I mean, it didn't exactly slam the door shut on the thought that maybe we could see another quarterback this season? I mean, is that unfair to say? Again, am I putting too much stock in the stat line of the performance? Or, I mean, is there a real possibility that a Ty Simpson and Austin Mack, somebody else, could have a great fall, and all of a sudden we are talking about a quarterback competition?
No, I mean, I think, like you said, because of the leadership qualities, because of what Jalen Milroe did for this program, because of just the fan base, how they've rallied around all that connection, I think he's going to get every opportunity at the beginning of this. If he really struggles, if he does not make that jump that everybody's expecting out of him from year one as a starter to year two as a starter, then yes, I thought we saw enough about Ty Simpson yesterday to say, hey, yes, he had a bad performance early on in the season last year, but my goodness, he just looked time and time again behind a second offensive line that didn't protect him great yesterday. He looked like a guy who can escape the pocket, who can keep his eyes downfield, who can make plays, throw from different angles. He was recognizing blitzes, replacing those blitzes. I think that Ty Simpson is a very, very good backup and a guy that, if needed, could be called upon. But I think Jalen Milroe will get every shot imaginable going into this season.
And Blayne, before we get off this one, a little bit of a side note, just kind of a funny side note I noticed during the broadcast. Caden Proctor on the sidelines, and it just goes to show kind of where we are in this transfer portal era, right? It's just like you would never imagine that years ago, and we heard the per sources, whatever, and they were pretty good sources, right? He's going to end up back at Bama, but to see him on the sideline yesterday, just the wild, wild west of college football in the portal. And I mean, it's just it's crazy. It's just crazy to see that. So anyways, that'll be a big boost for their offensive line. Yeah.
To see him allowed, because back in the day, there were some coaches who would be like, no, you're not coming back. Like that. It's just so different on many different levels now.
Blayne, let's move to Fayetteville, Arkansas. For the most part, I think we're going to go through alphabetical order. We may jump around, but either way, it's interesting, Blayne, in these spring games. There is a hype meter, I think, for every single fan base, right? And it doesn't matter how many times. I almost put out a clip on Friday and early Saturday, just kind of giving a spring game PSA, Blayne. Like, hey, take what you see with a grain of salt. If your team has a great spring game or not so great, or if this player does this or that, doesn't mean you're going 12-0, doesn't mean you're going 0-12, doesn't mean this kid's winning the Heisman, whatever. You look at Arkansas. This is a great case study for how a spring game can all of a sudden pick up a fan base and elevate a fan base and drive that hype meter through the roof. Because I feel like what I saw on social media and talking to Arkansas folks, I mean, they are freaking fired up after seeing the Bobby Petrino effect fell early. Taylon Green, I mean, I thought looked really, really good. He's got the size. You mentioned here in the notes, he can't just run. He doesn't just run. He can actually run. Like, he can make plays. He's a playmaker with his legs. He threw the football well. Talk about what you saw from Arkansas yesterday. And I know, again, you've seen the hype as well. Do you think it's fair and it's warranted after that spring game?
Oh yeah, it's warranted. I've never even stepped foot in the state of Arkansas. Okay, but it makes me excited for those Hog fans over there, because what I saw was, and we've seen it in our comments here, intensity across the board. This was not your regular spring game where there was brother-in-law going on. I think everybody knows on that roster that there is a sense of urgency. Sam Pittman knows there's a sense of urgency. And what do you do when you have that sense? You create competition and you make everybody go after it. And Travis Williams was over there. I mean, he was bringing some corner blitz early on in the game, and they caught Taylon Green early on. He didn't diagnose it well, and then comes back later on in the game. Same blitz comes at him, and he gets it that second time. But there was just so much stuff in between the physicality in the run game. We saw an Arkansas offensive line and running back combination pushing a pile down a field and absolutely road grading through some traffic there on defense. Very encouraging to see. But Taylon Green and Bobby Petrino has to look at this 6'6" young fella and all of these just behemoth wide receivers they have out there and think, wow, this is going to be a great opportunity. And we're going to get into some specifics on the offensive line. But yeah, I think Arkansas fans should be very excited from what they saw on Saturday.
And Blayne, to your point, I mean, the way Taylon Green performed, you look at his build and obviously his skill set, I think that's something to get fired up about. But to your point, man, if I'm a Hogs fan, I'm most fired up about the physicality. I mean, that's when Arkansas was rolling under Sam Pittman. We all know his track record. He's an offensive line guy, right? And so to see the return of that physicality and the bread and butter and really what has made them so good during his tenure is pushing people around. And I thought you saw that again. You saw the physicality return. Also, speaking of physicality, Tyrone Broden stood out in the red zone, 6'7". He's going to be a really fun target as well. But like you mentioned, man, for Mondo Carmona at left tackle, good as advertised. Again, it was really encouraging to see the guys in the trenches. And it's tough, right? It's tough in a spring game to really gauge what is the offensive line, what is the defensive line, what are they doing. If your offensive line is dominating, it's, oh my God, we're not going to be able to stop anybody. If it's the reverse, we're not going to be able to protect. But after the offensive line issues from a season ago, I think Hog fans have got to look at that as encouragement for maybe what's to come this fall.
Yeah, I just think they look different. I mean, they look different on the offensive line because Carmona, there was one time where they were running a play to his side where a guy got a little bit of, he started to shoot inside. He gave him his inside arm and then continued to climb up. Things you just didn't see out of the left tackle position last year from Arkansas. Keyshawn Blackstock looked good on the other side, but Addison Nichols and Josh Braun. Addison Nichols 306, 310, were somewhere in between there at the center position, and Josh Braun is, depending on what he ate for breakfast that morning, around 350. I mean, at the guard position, he's a big dude. He might need to trim down just a little bit, but they got some movement. And when you have a Jaquindon Jackson, you don't have to give too much movement because this young fella, 6'2", 235, and runs hard. But I'm going to give the acronym once again, GAS, just grown ass strength, to Rashad Dubinion, because Rashad Dubinion runs like he's shot out of a cannon. And he runs with violence. And I'm telling you, with all of those pieces starting to come together, plus I decided after watching this spring game, that Sam Pittman should sue Dan Enos for malpractice, because there's so many weapons out there, whether it's Haas, whether it's Broden, whether it's Armstrong, whether it's Tesla, whether it's, anybody out there. I mean, they've got tons of weapons, but Broden specifically, Armstrong, these are guys that are big, they can run. I think that combination with a improved running game and the wheels of Sategna, thanks, in the comments there. Sategna is the other track star they got at the slot. But when it comes down to it, I think you add all that together, the threat vertical in the passing game, inside run game, and then you add Taylor Green's legs on top of it. Bob Petrino's got some guys that he can go to war with out there.
Blayne, let's go to Athens, Georgia, the G-Day game. And I tell you, Blayne, as I was watching that one yesterday, and I saw the likes of Dylan Bell and Dominic Lovett and Carson Beck and Trevor Etienne and what the defense was doing, my biggest takeaway from it was them dogs is going to be hell yet again, man. What was your takeaways from it? I know as a Georgia guy, as a Georgia fan, all Georgia fans out there, it had to be a pleasure to watch. I mean, Kirby puts an emphasis on the spring game. It's really important to him. He's been doing that since his very first year. We talked to Brooks Austin about this, and he echoed that. But great game, great atmosphere, great turnout, right, for G-Day. But the performance on the field, again, some emerging stars, it feels like. Again, not to overreact, but we had heard from Kirby him talk about Dominic Lovett. We had talked about Dylan Bell before, and, man, it just felt like everything we had heard, it was reassured and then some in Athens yesterday.
Yeah, it's just got to be such a luxury just to go out there with a guy like Carson Beck. And Aaron Murray mentioned it on the broadcast Saturday. There were scouts out there in the NFL that thought Carson Beck, if he came out, could have been the fourth quarterback drafted in this draft. So that's late first, early second round probably. And you've got him lining up for you. And we saw the decision making. We saw him being able to thread the needle on some passes, because you got to give credit to Georgia's defense, particularly with Malachi Starks out, with Smile Munden out. They still stepped up and played hard. You saw some good things out of Raylan Wilson and C.J. Allen at inside linebacker, Ja'Cory Thomas at safety with Starks out, Dan Jackson, who was injured last year but has been around forever and was a key part of that first national championship they won a couple years ago. He's back at safety. Also got Jake Pope coming over from Alabama. The battle at the cornerback position, I think Julian Humphrey is probably him and Ellis Robinson are going to be there holding it down on the other side of Dalen Everett. So we saw some good things with the secondary, whereas Alabama saw, they had a struggle with a young secondary. We saw Georgia, some of their guys that are coming up are experienced guys that have been around. They just haven't been on the field as the guy. So I think that's reassuring that you saw there. But undoubtedly, when it comes to Dylan Bell and Dominic Lovett, as you mentioned, those two guys, I think, and then Colby Young, a big transfer from Miami, he looked good. Ra Thomas can do some things. But when it comes down to it, Dominic Lovett and Dylan Bell may be two of the most dynamic receivers that Georgia's had together in a long time. I mean, it's going to be special to watch with Carson Beck throwing them the ball. Offensive line looked great. And Chris, I mean, have you seen a running back room that's as deep and as physical and talent, multifaceted as that running back room?
Loaded. Just loaded. That's the only word for it, is loaded. Really, truly.
It's crazy. It's crazy. And then, you got stars like Michael Williams tipping a ball and getting an interception on defense. Different things, that a lot to be excited about. I think just the where Georgia's going, what they're going to be getting back this fall, and how they're going to be. Kirby wants them to be geared up for that spring game, because it's only less than 5 months before they tee off against Clemson. And, there's no rest there. You got to be ready to go right off the bat. So Kirby believes in intensity always. And that is what I think keeps this Georgia program on top and not complacent.
And Blayne, it was peak spring game overreaction. I saw a post from somebody, I think that was at G-Day, that said, after Carson Beck threw that interception that Michael Williams tipped up, somebody behind him in Sanford Stadium said that Gunnar Stockton should be QB1. So that really goes to you. Speaking, though, before we get off of Georgia, I think that was a big storyline going in that game, right? Gunnar Stockton, the backup quarterback position, it almost kind of looks like, and a lot can change, transfer portal, but Gunnar Stockton kind of taking the Carson Beck approach. He's just sort of biding his time, waiting his turn. He could be QB1 in 2025. We could be having this exact conversation, but talking about Gunnar Stockton in his first spring as the guy. What were your thoughts on him? I know for his game, it's tough to fully judge and fully dissect because running the football, using his legs is so pivotal. Of course, in these spring games, they're not letting guys, take the quarterback's head off or anything. But overall, just what you saw from him, what do you like, dislike? What are your thoughts on Gunnar Stockton right now at the quarterback position?
I think Gunner is going to be a fine backup for Georgia this year. I wouldn't rule out a Ryan Puglisi with a year under his belt to challenge him next year to be that starter. But Kirby is very loyal to guys. If you stick around and you do things the right way, you're going to get a shot. So I would say in 2025, Gunner's probably going to be the favorite. But Ryan Puglisi, very, very talented. Okay. And then there's also this other kid out there that everybody's trying to clamor for. 2025 quarterback Julian Lewis that is committed to USC right now. Georgia's trying to flip. If he were to come, all bets are off because he's the best quarterback I've seen play since Deshaun Watson. So in high school. So it's crazy all the amount of talent that's out there. But Gunnar Stockton, he has a much better command of the offense at this point. He has a very, very good rapport and always has with Mike Bobo. So yes, I think he's in a fine position to be what he needs to be for this Georgia team this year. And he is a tough guy. I don't think people have the misconception about Gunnar that he's going to be some really, really effective running quarterback. I think he's going to be a guy who can get you a first down when he needs to, but he's not some game breaker with his speed, but he's going to be a savvy guy and a guy who can run when needed.
And Blayne, before we get off the G-Day game, one last thing or two last things. Dylan Bell, stud. He was all over the field. I feel like you can tell in these spring games, it's like, who are they constantly going to? I just felt like every time I looked up at the screen, you're seeing Dylan Bell out there making plays. And then that catch by Dominic Lovett that we posted across our social medias, spring game or not, I don't give a damn what game. It could be a practice. That's one of the best catches you will ever see. So Georgia, I think it's way too early to say they're going to be better at wide receiver because they got to find that replacement for Brock Bowers or that go-to guy that's going to step up in the clutch moments. But there's a lot of options there. I think we could be talking about by end of season. Georgia was actually improved at wide receiver, which is scary. It's scary to think about. Deeper for sure. That's scary to think about. Blayne, let's move to LSU, Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Speaking of quarterbacks who had big days, my goodness, Garrett Nussmeier, who in a perfect 7 for 7 over 140 yards. The running game looked fantastic as well. Defensively, I know that was a big talking point, right, with Blake Baker, the brand new defensive coordinator. I know LSU folks that I was seeing on social media, talked to a couple as well. Listen, the bar is in hell, Blayne, when it comes to defense, right? It just any sort of forward steps and forward progression. Yes, it's going to be received with praise and with celebration, right? So, which is a good thing sometimes. But there was a lot of positive reception of what you saw from the defense, a defense that was attacking, was swarming, was wrapping up, and just simply making tackles. We didn't see that a lot last year. Again, Caleb Jackson, like I mentioned, the running back position, he looked really, really good. I think you're going to see a lot more of course, Jaden Daniels no longer there, but they're not going to have to lean on their quarterback to produce basically what it felt like 100% of their running game. The good, the bad, the ugly. What did you take away from the LSU spring game yesterday?
I mean, I've said this many times if you can go back and look at content, but with that 13 on his back and the howitzer hanging from the right side of his body, Garrett Nussmeier has some little Dan Marino in him. I'm just telling you, this guy can throw it as good. People talked about Joe Milton's arm last year. I'm telling you, Garrett Nussmeier has just as strong of an arm. It is ridiculous. It is ridiculous. He made and it's not just being able to just drop back, sit, throw. He can throw it at different angles. He slid up in the pocket and threw a ball across his body down the field to Xavier Thomas, who, oh, by the way, just another weapon that's played in the SEC that transfers over from Mississippi State that had a big play. He made an unbelievable throw. He looked so calm and collected back there. And I think, when you talk about those weapons, Kyron Lacey made a huge play. Xavier Thomas, that huge play. You got Chris Hilton, who's down there just burning down the sideline. They barely didn't connect on one. And then a guy that nobody was talking about as much as they need to be, Mike Denbrock last year, before the season last year, I know he's at Notre Dame now, but before the season last year, Alabama transfer, former 5-star guy from Edna Karr High School, I believe, in New Orleans. Aaron Anderson was a guy they said, hey, we got to get him the football. We got to get him. Didn't get him the football as much last year. They got him the football in multiple ways this year. I think he's going to be a guy that steps up. But the offense looks great. The running game, listen, Nuss is not going to run the ball the same way that Jaden Daniels did. So those running backs are going to have to produce. And I thought that Jackson and Williams looked great. They focused on a lot more of gap scheme runs. And I will say the bad is people can say whatever they want, improvement on the defense. I didn't see it. The run defense was atrocious. They did not fit the gap scheme well. They did not handle motion away from well in terms of adjusting and then refitting their gaps and things of that nature. Didn't wrap up on a lot of things. I thought the defense had left a lot to be desired. Some busted coverages. Sage Ryan has moved back to the safety position where they say he's more natural, but it was busted coverage for Kyron Lacy in cover 2. He didn't take the half of the field to that side. So, I think that's kind of the bad and the ugly for LSU's on the defense. But on the offensive side, they will not skip a beat. I think they're going to continue to get just 2 statues that are so experienced in tackles with Campbell and Jones. It was really, really good offensively. And, I think we just got to see Blake Baker kind of continue to work on this thing as we get close to fall on the defense.
And Blayne, like I told you, the bar is in hell for the LSU defense. So, you're seeing that chatter. I mean, I have the same questions you do, Blayne, because you watch that. And again, we've talked to a lot of different LSU folks, and they've shared the concern of the interior defensive line. And on a side note, not speaking on the spring game specifically, but off what we saw, the portal's about to open up. I would imagine LSU is going to be looking for a couple big uglies to help plug those holes. I know they got the Wisconsin kid that they kind of feel like it's more of a role player, but if they could go land a difference maker, I mean, they need to. They need to because, you love to see the run game and what they did, but also you think about what that defense was last year, and it's weird to think about LSU not having the bodies in the middle, but, I mean, you saw it. You saw it firsthand. So they got to go plug some holes, I think, in the portal.
And by the way, I didn't even talk about it. Mason Taylor is going to be like a 15-year veteran in the NFL. Okay. He is so polished at tight end. He runs crisp routes. He's physical in the run game. He can be a guy who blocks on the edge. He can wrap around and block in the gap scheme game. Gets out in the flat, can catch the ball over the middle. Red zone target. Mason Taylor. Just look at him. He's going to be terrific in the NFL.
Blayne, let's move to Rocky Top, the Tennessee Volunteers, their spring game at Neyland Stadium. Of course, just a crowd of 10,000, by the way, because they're doing renovations on their stadium. It was kind of a ho-hum game, Blayne. I don't know if I'd have believed you if you told me it was nothing after the first quarter with a Josh Heupel offense. But, I tell you, Blayne, I left so impressed with that front seven yet again. And this is probably one of Tennessee's. This might be their best defensive front in over a decade, right? We all know about James Pierce Jr. and the specimen that he is, a freak, if you will. A couple transfer portal guys, or a transfer portal guy we've talked a lot about on the outside. Chris Brazzell had a good day. I thought Nico was solid. Your overall thoughts? Again, it felt like a very ho-hum spring game for Tennessee.
Yeah, I don't think the intensity – I don't think Josh Heupel and company are going to look back and think offensively maybe – the intensity was where it needed to be. Now, they did make some big plays at different times, but I thought defensively, the effort, the tenacity up front, they get after it. Rodney Garner has been doing this a long time, and he has got those guys, Amari Thomas, guys up front in that Tennessee front seven that are playing extremely well. At the beginning of the game, you saw Jeremiah Thielander, who's from my hometown in Gainesville, Georgia, that he's really come on at inside linebacker. He came around on the first play of the game, and Tennessee busted a protection. They didn't switch off defensive end and inside linebacker who looped around the outside. Nico takes a sack. So I think that defense played extremely, extremely well. But when it comes down to it, I think what we saw was an emergence on the outside of some weapons, as you mentioned, and Brazzell and then Mike Matthews, a freshman from Lilburn, Georgia, Parkview High School, that I had to stop the tape, and I went on the roster and found who's 89. Oh, that's Mike Matthews. His body, he does not look like a true freshman. He does not look like a guy who just came from high school, and he was running by defenders on the back end. Now, I will say this, as good as that front seven was for Tennessee, oh boy, the secondary has some holes and some issues. I know Jerron McCoy did some good things. The transfer from, I believe, Oregon State, they had a couple guys come in. But when it comes down to it, I don't know that the depth is there, especially when you divide it into two teams and stuff like that. I don't know that the depth is there for Tennessee in the secondary. They're going to have to get to that quarterback and get to him early to be able to help those guys on the back end, maybe play some more zone coverage than they have in years past, things of that nature, because I think right now it's a little questionable on the back end. But I thought, listen, Nico is going to be just rock steady. I'm telling you, he's a guy who he can make every throw on the field. I think you'll see Tennessee utilize the middle of the field more than they did with Joe Milton, because I think they trust Nico. I think they trust him to go through concepts to be able to avoid disaster in the middle of the field. And I think you'll see Tennessee's passing game get a little bit more diverse that way.
You know, Blayne, I know Tennessee fans were really impatient with wanting to see Nico. I think some were even frustrated last year when Joe Milton, he wasn't terrible, but the drop-off was severe from Hendon Hooker. And again, I know I saw a lot of old folks on the timeline clamoring for Nico. But I feel like this worked out perfectly for Josh Heupel. You allow this kid to learn, to adjust to the speed of the game, right? Learn under the mistakes and the successes of Joe Milton. Gets in the bowl game, has success. Now we go through spring, has a positive spring game. It really just feels like it couldn't have worked out better, and it's all lining up for the Nico mania to take place this fall, like really, truly. And so I'm certainly excited to see it play out.
Yeah, no, it's going to be great. And listen, quite honestly, I walked away from that scrimmage just like I did last year's scrimmage, saying this Gaston Moore kid is the backup quarterback can freaking play. I'm telling you, he came from UCF. If something happens, if Nico rolls an ankle and has to come out for a series or something like that, Gaston Moore can go in there and make plays. So that's a great luxury for Tennessee to have. But like you said, he is going to be Nico being he is going to be just so steady. He's going to be able to do things with his legs, which they didn't have to utilize yesterday. He's growing, he's learning. It's worked out perfectly, and now he's got weapons surrounding him on the outside. The running back position is something that is a little concerning because we know what Sampson can do. Cam Selden, who I think is underrated, is going to be a true stud. He's not going to be back from injury until mid-September. The other running backs didn't look too great. I mean, so you better hope that they figure out the depth at the running back position going forward. But I think Tennessee and Josh Heupel, they always help out that running game by their pace. I did think one thing was interesting, Chris. I wanted your thoughts on this. With helmet communication, they said on the broadcast, Tennessee's not even going to use it because they go so fast. I mean, do you think that's a detriment to Tennessee? Do you think it would help Nico, to have Heupel be able to tell him some things in his ear or something like that? I mean, they're not even going to use it this year.
Well, I think it's one of those things, Blayne, where I'm going to trust the way, however Josh Heupel wants to operate. I think you got to give him the benefit of the doubt. As good as they've been offensively, I mean, I don't see how it would hurt, right? Any extra communication that you're going to have, being able to be in your quarterback's ear. But I think what he's saying does make sense from a standpoint of they don't think they play type of deal. And I know that's maybe, when it works well. When it doesn't, obviously we can criticize it, critique it, what have you. But I get where he's coming from, but I'm going to give Josh Heupel the benefit of the doubt because they've just been so damn good offensively. And last year, I more so took away, not, oh my goodness, Joe Milton, he was bad. I was like, look how much they got out of Joe Milton. Like that was actually credit to Josh Heupel and his system. I mean, this was a guy who had lost multiple quarterback battles, and they still won 8 games with that guy under center. So, like, that was the way I looked at it, really, truly. So,
and watch, somebody's going to dang take Joe Milton higher than they should in the NFL draft
because he can throw a football 100 yards. Yeah, no doubt. we've seen a video of that time and time again. Let's move to Gainesville, Florida. And what's fun, Blayne, is like I mentioned, the hype meter and the hype levels for backup quarterbacks. A lot of times you see that happening. Florida's got a damn good one in QB1 and Graham Mertz. I know you mentioned it here. Hey, listen, I was wrong. I had this dude this time last year ranked 14th out of 14 SEC quarterbacks going into the year. This dude is at minimum, top half the league quarterback. Still probably doesn't get the respect he deserves. I thought yesterday he only reaffirmed that, right? Showed great command, great control of the offense. But DJ Lagway was the story, man. DJ Lagway was the story. A couple touchdown passes. The quarterback of the future in Gainesville. I think the only question, Blayne, is Billy Napier going to be his head coach throughout his career? And the other big takeaway I had, Blayne, you don't even have it in your notes, but I'll bring it up. Florida, what are we doing on special teams? And you know what? It's so nitpicky. Listen, it's nitpicking. And I had some Florida folks get upset about it. But here's the thing. We're only nitpicking because it has been a problem the first 2 years. And Florida, and I'm sure you saw this post on the field goal attempt, they've got 10 guys on the field. And we can't even get lined up correctly on special teams in a spring game, Blayne. I guess the positive is you're making these mistakes now. But on the other side, you've been making these mistakes for over 2 years, and you still can't get lined up. So, it feels right now so minor and minuscule, but it's the Billy Napier era in a nutshell. So I don't know.
What's the old saying? How you do anything is how you do everything. It's got to matter. The details have to matter. Now, speaking on Lagway is just uber talented. I mean, the first time I ever saw him, at Willis High School in terms of, covering recruiting and watching him play, and he's just a hellacious baseball player as well. He's so good, so talented as a young man, young athlete, that he's got the arm strength. He's got all this stuff. There were some wild throws. There was some. He was amped up a little bit. They had nearly 50,000 people in there, and I think that's a tip of the hat to the Florida fan base, by the way, because there's been a lot of negativity, a lot of not to be excited about in terms of the recruiting taking a dip when at the end of the cycle and all that kind of stuff. But they came out to the Swamp and they were loud and they helped out that team. But I will say this, I'm telling you, Graham Mertz is the most wrong I've ever been about a player, because I thought that we were going to see the Wisconsin Graham Mertz, and what we've saw is a guy who I'm going to go ahead and say now he's going to have a role in the league. Okay. I don't care if he's a backup for 10 years or whatever, but this guy is going to find himself on an NFL roster after this year, and he's going to be prepared. He makes checks at the lines of scrimmage. He's able to layer the ball between the second and third level. He's got the ability to get outside the pocket and use different arm angles, different launch points. I think Graham Mertz is special. I think that, Jaden Baugh coming on as a freshman at running back, that is much needed, because it was always who's going to be the guy with Trevor Etienne leaving that's going to be there to be the running mate with Montrell Johnson. And Jaden Baugh showed that I think he can do that. And I don't know if Tryon Webb, I don't know what his status was for yesterday and things of that nature, but he's a guy that played a little bit last year, but Jaden Baugh looks to me like he could be a guy that could step in and help out a lot. And I think what you have to be encouraged about is, all right, who's the other weapon outside of Trey or Eugene, whichever one you want to refer to him. Trey Wilson is what they call him. He's going to be Mr. Everything, get it done. Aiden Mizell looked good. Marcus Burke looked good. I mean, these are guys that they're counting on to step up, particularly Marcus Burt as an elder statesman there, with Ricky Pearsall having left, who's going to be the leadership guy in that room. So a lot to be excited about. I think that's good things to see. I did see a few issues tackling, some busted coverages on the defensive end. One thing that's positive is, Armstrong didn't just go ham on them, bringing every blitz known to man. I think that was a lot better. So it made the offense look better. This time last year, Chris, we were talking about the offense, going freaking engage 8 on them every play.
It wasn't a notable spring game for Florida. I think that was probably the most positive thing outside of the special teams blunder. And by the way, one last thing on the offense before we get off this one. Boardingham, the tight end, he flashed last year, made his presence felt yesterday. I like him as kind of a sneaky breakout player in that offense. Boardingham's got that make. He's got that build. He just looks like one of those high caliber SEC tight ends. I think when we're talking about an offense looking for playmakers to step up this year with the Ricky Pearsalls of the world no longer there, I think Boardingham at tight end could be a dude for them this fall. So that'll be a fun one to watch. Blayne, let's get to Lexington, Kentucky, talk about Kentucky spring game as we wind down here. This was one, we're starting to get into the spring games that need quotations around the word game. Kentucky's was more of kind of a glorified practice. And I know these are all kind of glorified scrimmages, but this was one we didn't really get a lot of intel on. I don't think Kentucky football's social media accounts posted any highlights or anything, which was very abnormal for the rest of the SEC. I think Brock Vandagriff's the big thing to talk about here, though. This is a guy very well, obviously spent time at Georgia. He's a physical specimen, high expectations. We had high expectations for a transfer quarterback in Lexington last year. He did not come through. From what you saw, from what you took away, Brock Vandagriff's performance, and did anything else, I should say, jump out from Kentucky's spring game yesterday?
I mean, you couldn't really get a gauge for a lot of the physicality because they did do the kind of, okay, don't really tackle them to the ground, all that kind of stuff. So I hate that, and we're going to get into that before we get off the air here, all that kind of stuff. But Brock Vandagriff, he's always looked like the part. I mean, he's always looked like just a true physical specimen. He's a guy that I think his legs didn't really come into play. They did some draw play stuff, some different things like that, where, they blew the whistle early that he looked like he was going to have some running room. He's a guy that's going to be physical and is going to be a guy that can make some things happen with his legs. But I think the biggest thing is you saw him get outside the pocket, kind of direct traffic to some guys, have a guy break back to him, put it on the money, be able to make some nice throws to Dane Key and some others around there. But Kentucky is going to be, I think with Bush Hamden, it was more about, okay, can we just execute the base stuff? Can we go out here and not look like we, don't know what we're doing yet, that we have a just basic understanding of how to operate in this offense. And then this summer we'll dial it up. But I thought that, hey, it was fine for what it was. But we know what the strength of this Kentucky team is going to be. It's going to be, offensive line, getting after it with Mark Stoops, chip train them, being able to come in there and run the rock for them. And then that defense, Deion Walker, JJ Weaver, all of these guys on that front seven being able to step up and play physically for Brad White and Mark Stoops. So, and playmakers on the outside with Dane Key and Barry Brown, whose special teams is going to be huge for Kentucky once again this year. So not really a lot learned out of the Wildcats, except that I think Brock Vandagriff is going to have every opportunity to have tremendous success this year in the SEC for Kentucky.
And Blayne, on the note of physicality, like you mentioned, and the differing in philosophies, again, we watched Bama, we watched Georgia, we watched Arkansas, virtually everyone else. I'm surprised Mark Stoops in Kentucky would not want to get after it more so when it comes to pads popping, because this was a team, they didn't run the ball really all that well last year. Physicality, and I feel like the last couple of years they've kind of gotten away from that, the thing that made them so good under him, and it feels like maybe an opportunity missed. Again, I don't want to overreact or overemphasize. Kentucky could be very good this year, but it feels like a bit of a missed opportunity to push your guys, challenge your guys. And on that note, Blayne, it's a great segue into our final spring quote-unquote game, the Grove Bowl. And listen, Lane Kiffin, we love Lane Kiffin on this show. Lane Kiffin has shown some love back to us. He marches to the beat of his own drum. Blayne, I have never seen something like what we saw with the Grove Bowl. Again, I put spring game in quotations because this thing featured a dunk contest. We had Joey Chestnut eating hot dogs. We had a sorority tug of war. And then we had 7-on-7. There wasn't a pad or a helmet in sight, Blayne. What do you make of this? I want to dive into this because I think there's going to be a lot of differing opinions here. And if Ole Miss goes 11-1 this year and they're in the college ball playoff, I think Lane Kiffin is going to be looked at as an innovator. If they go 7-5 or 8-4 and they get pushed around, I think there's going to be some, whether it's right, wrong, or indifferent, right, fair, unfair, folks are going to be able to, and maybe they're going to take shots and say, well, look, you didn't get, this kind of reflected your culture, your soft, your finesse, so how do you look at this? Like, how do you look at this? Are which side do you lean? And I feel like I know which way you're going to go with this.
Lane Kiffin says, and he says it all the time, these are professional athletes, right? And Ole Miss has invested a lot of money in this team. Okay, a lot of NIL dollars. So I think he just didn't want to get anybody hurt. Honestly, I think he wanted to keep everybody healthy. But, you know, the way that it went at that point and what we've seen with Lane Kiffin, I almost expected to see kind of one of these come out, you know, in a little promo, little pro wrestling out here, you know, hold up the belt, all this kind of stuff, because I'm just telling you, Lane is all about the show, man, and he wants to keep those guys healthy. He wants to be able to have that team at full go. And listen, that's one way to do it, and it's one way to ingratiate yourself to the fan base and have a lot of fun and do a lot of things they did. But I will say this: whether it's Ole Miss, whether it's Kentucky, whether it's Missouri, I'm going to just quote the great modern day philosopher that is Cam Smith, the former cornerback for South Carolina. At some points, you just got to drop your nuts and go play. And I'm just telling you, the only way you get better at football is to play football. Okay. And Kirby Smart believes that. You know, Kalen DeBoer believes that. And obviously Sam Pittman believes it, because I'm telling you, Woo Pig Sooie was out there popping the pads. I'm just telling you, they were popping them on Saturday. And I think they're going to be better for it, all three of those teams. We'll see what – listen, nobody's shown more love to Missouri and Ole Miss than you and I have on this channel. We both believe they're in that top tier. They're true playoff contenders. But does some of that, you know, showmanship, some of that softness, if you will, from not going out there and just getting after it? And who knows what they did? They may have had some hellacious, you know, scrimmages on their own behind closed doors, all that kind of stuff, where they got after it and Lane Kiffin just wanted to have fun and do something different. But when it comes down to it, I'm just a guy who's a big proponent of, let's go out there with fans watching us, get a little bit of that pressure for some of the young guys, and see who's going to be the hammer, who's going to be the nail type scenario. And, you know, we didn't see it out of those guys.
And Blayne, I'll reference a different philosopher in his own right. Mike Tyson once said, everybody's got a plan or they get punched in the face. And, you know, it might be the spring, but at least you can throw some punches and kind of figure out who's who and learn about your roster. And again, you sort of miss out on that opportunity when you don't hit, you don't tackle, and when, in Ole Miss's case, you don't even play a game. So, I mean, I don't want to be, and I've been, Blayne, admittedly, I've been giddy to get your take. I have, because I know you're someone that, you know, it grinds your gears a little bit, right? And I totally get that. I totally understand it, because there was a side of me for sure. My immediate reaction was, why even have a spring game? Why even advertise it? Advertise it as a fan day, because that's what it is. It is a 7-on-7. It is a –
They took the Pro Bowl is what they did. They took what the Pro Bowl is doing, the Pro Bowl games, and they copied it is all they did.
Yeah, but I do wonder if Ole Miss has the season that we expect, and I don't want to make it clear. I don't think either of us are saying because the Grove Bowl went the way it did, Ole Miss, sell your Ole Miss stock. Not saying that. I mean, I wonder, does it help in recruiting? Does it help in the portal? Is it advertising Ole Miss as this crazy fun place to play? And I wonder, and we posted this on social media, I wonder if this may actually be the future of spring games, where we're seeing more 7-on-7. We're not seeing tackling quick, because, you know, and I think thankfully, Blayne, somebody in the comments, or you can correct me if I'm wrong, thankfully, I don't think we had any like major injuries yesterday. I think everybody did a really, really good job of protecting their talent, even at Georgia and Bama and Arkansas and some of these others that were really physical. I don't think anybody notable. And of course, these coaches, they preach protect your own, right? We're all on the same team end of the day. But I don't know. I just wonder, maybe this is the future of spring games, and it's going to turn into more of a fan day. But again, I'm sure there's many, Blayne, you, and I'm sure there's many legends that wore that red and black, or that crimson, or what have you, that would that would probably vomit on themselves if they ever saw Alabama or Georgia having a dunk contest or a hot dog eating contest instead of hitting each other on a football field. So I don't know that. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. I'm going to say that right now.
I hope not. I mean, I surely hope not. But here's one thing where I hope it's going for everybody. they talk about this super league that's going to form, whether it's 60, 80, whatever teams one day, all this kind of stuff, and more money being involved and players, maybe even becoming employees one day and all this kind of stuff. Who's going to suffer from that is these games that you pay people to come play you with, whether it's group of 5 or whether it's FCS schools or something like that. I hope that we get to the point where we can do it in a controlled way, whatever, but schedule an FCS team or schedule a group of 5 team and play them in the spring and get fans in there and get some juice and get some real live bullets where you're actually having to see, okay, what's this other team got? And, how are we preparing for it? All this kind of stuff. I think it'll prepare your staff better. It'll prepare the kids better, all that kind of stuff. That's where I hope we're going. One thing I wanted to ask you that I totally forgot about in the Alabama game. Chris, did you notice there was about 6 bad snaps in the Alabama game, once again by the centers? And listen, the persona non grata, he's at Ohio State now. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So the center transferred out
Can't
from
blame
last
him.
year.
Can't blame him.
Can't blame him. What's going on in Bama? Okay. They cannot snap the football consistently. And I think that's an issue for the Crimson Tide, whether it was Austin Mack having to go down or this way or that way, or Jalen Milroe getting snaps, just rolled back to him a couple of times. I think that's a bigger issue that's going on at Alabama, is for some reason they can't snap the football efficiently or consistently.
Blayne, it was a heck of a day. All the SEC spring games. What was when you leave looking back at yesterday, again, and spring games aren't great for drawing conclusions. Let's do it anyways. Your biggest takeaway, what was like the one thing you left yesterday with that stood out that may or may not affect the way you think about a certain player, a certain team, or certain thing in your mind heading into 2024 season?
I got 2. One, Arkansas has weapons, man, and Bobby Petrino knows how to use them. And I think they're going to be improved enough on the offensive line to be able to utilize them. Taylon Green, like I said, can run. I mean, this guy is electric. What he did in the Mountain West Championship game last year, that run, you go find it on YouTube, one of the more dazzling runs that you'll see from a quarterback. And then the accuracy that he showed throwing the ball to 6'7" receiver Tyrone Broden, Andrew Armstrong, who looks like a condor out there as well. I mean, just huge guys that he's throwing the ball to. Luke Haas, it may be the Mackey Award winner. I mean, he's that good at tight end. Just they've got guys all over the place, and if they can run the football, they'll be even better. And then 2, with LSU, all I know about LSU is when they get on that field, somebody's band's going to be playing, either LSU's or the other teams, because I don't think they can stop anybody again this year. Either Blake Baker's going to have to get some more bodies in there, and I don't know that anybody's going to stop them. When you talk about, I think they're going to be way improved running the football with Josh Williams and with Caleb Jackson and Nuss. I mean, he can just sling it over their mountains. Okay. I mean, he's got a cannon of an arm and has receivers to throw it to, whether it's Lacey, whether it's Hilton, whether it's Aaron Anderson, Mason Taylor at tight end, so many weapons. I think LSU is going to be explosive in good ways and bad in 2024.
And Blayne, not to echo you virtually word for word, but my biggest takeaway did come from Fayetteville, and what I saw from Arkansas, the Bobby Petrino effect, Taylon Green, his skill set. I'm not saying Arkansas is going to win 8 or 9 games, right? I'm not saying they're going to be worlds better than we expected, but I do look at Arkansas' schedule. We go through and we give, whether it's way too early predictions or we give predictions over this summer. I stop for a moment when we're talking Arkansas. I do. Where it may have been somewhat of it felt like a sure thing before, Arkansas is going to be better. I don't know how much better, but they're going to be better. They're going to be dynamic. They're going to be fun to watch. I can't wait to see how this Bobby Petrino, I don't want to say experiment, but how the Bobby Petrino saga this time around works out in Fayetteville. I think Arkansas can be a really fun surprise type of team this year. We shall see, but yesterday was a good sign. Guys, that's going to do all for us. He's Blayne Gilmer. I'm Chris Phillips. Before we get out of here, be sure you head over to RHOBACK.com. Check out our friends at RHOBACK. We appreciate RHOBACK. I was at the Masters earlier this week. I saw that little dog logo all over the place. I mean, RHOBACK is taking over their Azalea collection. It's out for a limited time, guys. The weather's warming up. It's golf season. It's spring game season. We got a couple more next weekend that Blayne and I will break down and discuss. What have you. Be sure to get yours today over at RHOBACK.com. Use promo code SECU at checkout to get 20% off your entire first purchase. Polos, quarter zips, hoodies, pants, shorts, you name it. They got everything. RHOBACK.com. Promo code SECU at checkout. 20% off. Like I mentioned, Blayne and I will be live somewhere around this time next week, maybe earlier in the day. I think we've got 4 more spring games, Blayne, lined up. So it should be a lot of fun, guys. Like I mentioned, be sure you hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube. Check us out via podcast, wherever you get your podcasts, all across social media, and at SECUnfiltered.com as well. Once again, guys, for Blayne Gilmer, I'm Chris Phillips. We appreciate you guys tuning in, and we'll catch you on the other side.